Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for the Ramah Taskforce. In this video, we'll talk about who Ramah are, how they play, what are their strengths, limitations, and faction identity, and then jump into Infinity Army to go through many of the units that showcase their faction. Finally, at the end of the video, we'll actually have a series of lists to work through, because there's a bit to chew on here in terms of limitations we have to overcome. And I also wanted to include, if possible, at least one list that has seen tournament play, so thank you very much to the Grix for submitting that. On that note, this video comes courtesy of the request by channel supporter Karatse, Michael, who asked for a Ramah Taskforce faction focus with a focus on what got glowed up, and specifically to mention Tariq and Quarij. Now, we will be mentioning Tariq and Quarij quite a bit during this video. They feature in 2 of the 3 lists we'll show at the end. But I do need to manage expectations in terms of talking about glow-ups that Ramah has received. And the reason for that is that while there are many regiments in Ramah that we will focus on, and which I have good things to say about, overall I'm fairly strongly of the opinion that even post the October update, Ramah Taskforce sits in the position of one of Infinity's challenge factions. They are difficult to play, they are a challenge, and that's something I want to both address and provide some design criticism with regards to before we actually move on into the video proper. I'd also like to provide significant thanks to both the Grix and Tasu from the Big Infinity Discord. Prior to prepping for and recording this video, Ramah Taskforce are not a faction I have significant experience with in N5. I've played them a little bit ahead of doing this recording, but I am not an expert, and so I put the call out for anyone who could give me information about the faction, their experience, some lists that they've played, and both Tasu and the Grix responded with a huge amount of information, which has been incredibly helpful and has gone directly into preparing this video. So massive thanks to both of you. If you'd like to talk to either of them, both of them were on the big Discord in the Hack Islam channel, and both were just super helpful sharing their opinions and experience. Now, before we jump into the faction focus proper, talking about strengths, limitations, etc., I want to just talk a little bit about why Ramah Taskforce are a challenge faction, and specifically why that's not something I like for them in N5. And this is mostly in the vein of getting this off my chest before I talk about them in a little bit more of an analytical and optimistic sense, so that I can kind of clear the air. When we talk about limitations, we'll go in pretty significant detail about some of the issues that Ramah struggled with. There's a lot of stuff in their faction that is expensive and maybe shouldn't be as much as it costs. They can have difficulty defending, there are big gaps in their roster, and a lot of the top-end stuff can be underwhelming or have significant vulnerabilities. All of this collectively adds up to a faction that in N5 is pretty difficult to play, and that's kind of a problem. It's not a problem that factions like that exist in general. Actually, I am of the opinion, and I've spoken about this in the past, that challenge-focused factions in a game with as many factions as Infinity does are something that's kind of worth having. When you're designing a game with 50+ factions, you do need to pay attention to the top end, you need to make sure that nothing gets particularly overwhelmingly powerful, but you can have a little bit of variance at the bottom end of the faction pool, provided you don't put those weaker factions directly in the path of new or incoming players, like they did with JSA in M3. So long as players have to kind of seek out the experience of playing a slightly weaker or underpowered faction, it's okay that those exist, because that serves a need that some players have for different reasons. You might have a player who wants the challenge of playing an underdog faction. You might have a player who is a person who chases snowflakes, who really likes playing factions that nobody else plays. You might have someone who really wants to be able to say, yeah, I didn't win many games, but the ones that I did win, I really earned. And you might have players who want the psychological release valve of knowing that they are playing a slightly weaker faction, so there are not as high stakes if they lose a game. These are all reasons why some well-known weaker factions as a subset of the game at large can be kind of a good addition to the faction mix. But one of the things about underdog or challenge factions that I personally think is important is narrative or emotional resonance with that mechanical theme. And that's something that Ramah Taskforce don't have, because the theme of Ramah Taskforce, the narrative underpinnings of the faction, is actually cool as hell. Like, these are super awesome, cool, good guys. They are a faction of super soldiers, like medically enhanced, biomedically enhanced, Hack Islam troops. They conduct anti-slavery operations. There's this entire section of their backstory where they fought this shadow war for ages against rival, dangerous, hugely unethical biomedical corporations from other nations and powers, and eventually triumphed at great cost. And all of that is super cool. The idea of soldiers who are fundamentally human but elevated, taking the fight to genuinely evil foes, that's just really cool. That is cool and it is resonant, but it does not align with the idea of a challenge faction. If we look at factions who are very, very good at being the underdogs, factions like Druze and Shazvasti and Ariadna. Now, I'm aware Ariadna are actually quite good these days. I'm very happy that they got some knife buffs, to the point that some random could pick them up and take them and win a satellite event with them. But if you're going to have an underdog faction, something like French Merovingia, for example, fits the bill because Ariadna's hat, what they're wearing, is this idea of humans with less technology on a hostile planet, surviving against the odds. That's perfect. That's an underdog faction. Shazvasti literally had their civilization blown up. They're a race of survivors. Perfect. That's an underdog faction. And the Druze are literally just a random criminal organization fighting against hyperpowers and alien invaders for their own patch of turf. Perfect. That's an underdog faction. All of those factions resonate with the mechanical identity of being a little bit behind the curve and a little bit harder to win with. Not impossible, just a bit more difficult, a bit more challenging, rewarding when you win. All of those factions work with that identity. Ramah Taskforce kind of don't. Ramah Taskforce, in my mind, should be sitting at like the A-, B+ kind of faction power level, where they've got a bit more flex and a bit more strength and can be kind of intimidating. Not to play with, but to play against, because that's what their theme kind of implies. Their theme is really cool. Their theme are super soldiers and good guys, and elite professional soldiery and military operators. And yes, some of that comes through in their mechanics, but regardless of the changes that took place in the most recent update in October 2025, to my mind, Ramah Taskforce really should be on the shortlist for the next faction to receive something like that military order style glow up. There's a lot that could be done with them to bring them up to the promise that their narrative sells. They're not there just yet, but I do have plenty of hope that they can get there in the future. Corvus Belli has been very good with updates to this game over the course of N5. I have really liked what I have seen so far, and so my genuine hope is that Ramah Taskforce stocks continue to rise, because they're not trading super heavily right now. Okay, criticism done. That is my commentary on why I don't like that Ramah Taskforce are a little bit of a challenge faction despite thinking that they are. Let's actually talk about how they play, what they do, and what is their faction identity. So, faction strengths first. Ramah Taskforce are the super soldier faction, and that means that they have a lot of troops that fit into this kind of interesting archetype, where you will have, generally speaking, a human-shaped and sized soldier who is unhackable, not super heavily armored, but with a bunch of skills and abilities that reflect that augmentation that they've had. No wound incapacitation and shock immunity are very common, but you also tend to have reasonable defenses, lots of mobility, lots of jumping and climbing plus, lots of 6-2 move, lots of just general stat spreads that are a little bit more than human, but a little bit less than fully armored target-assisted super soldiers. These guys aren't in power armor, they aren't Master Chiefs, but they are more than just human. And in some cases, that skill variety can actually be really interesting. Probably the star standout super soldier of the faction, the most powerful super soldier that isn't a character, is the Namur, who we'll go through with a fair bit of detail, and that is a profile which does have some weaknesses and limitations, but it's also the kind of profile that will just result in your opponent going, sorry, they've got what as well? There are so many things baked into a Namur's profile that some of it somewhere is likely to cause a surprise for your opponent and give you a line of play. You've got a lot of random immunities, or mixed close combat and gunfighting skills, templates. And so while many of Ramah Taskforce most elite soldiers aren't more elite than the best in class in other factions, they do tend to have a variety of skills and offensive tools, whether it be ranged and melee, templates, etc., that let you pursue whatever the best line is in a situation. As a military faction, it's also a faction with pretty flexible links, including some very accessible duos and pretty decent keywording. You shouldn't struggle in Ramah Taskforce to form up interesting and powerful links. And while this combination is less powerful than it was, say, in N4, it is a faction that can just duo line infantry with reasonable quality gunfighters and just run little utility duos that combine, say, a specialist and a burst 5 marksmanship HMG without breaking the bank. It's also a faction, it's Hack Islam, so there are lots of doctors, and Ramah Taskforce in particular, this is unique amongst Hack Islam factions. Ramah Taskforce really kind of can get doctors wherever it needs to. This is a faction with linkable doctors, super jump doctors, infiltrating doctors, parachutist doctors, and while that's not necessarily the greatest thing of all time, it is interesting and unique and something the faction does that other factions don't. It's also not too badly set up to play Ramah Taskforce as a kind of hard ARO game. Now, this is cope a little bit, but one of the things that's historically been said about Ramah Taskforce is that their ARO game is a little bit weak. I think that's less true these days than it used to be. You can build plenty of ARO guns into Ramah Taskforce. The issue is, I think you kind of need to, because Ramah don't defend in other ways. Other factions can defend with minefields or soft AROs or corner guards, or one of my preferred ways of defending, just by having too many troops that can all progress the game state in useful ways for my opponent to be able to actually knock me off my feet, because they would have to kill my entire army and put me in retreat to stop me from having meaningful aggressive options or ways to pursue the scenario. Ramah Taskforce can't do that. Ramah Taskforce tends to be fairly clearly delineated into bottom end and top end troops, and so you need to build a defense plan into your lists, but the tools are there and exist. Even if it's just making a little more use than everyone else does of the humble total reaction bot, Ramah is well set up to do that. And speaking of top end and bottom end stuff, Ramah Taskforce does genuinely have a bottom-end architecture of just cheap and accessible options that they can take to subsidize the expensive stuff. Now, there are some downsides to that, which we will talk about, but they have AVA3 flash pulses, and they will often take AVA3 flash pulses to enable more access to super soldiers. And once you've taken those, you can also take 11-point damage 6 flamethrower line infantry that can be linked to add more to your order pool. You should always be able to get up to 15 troopers in Ramah Taskforce. Finally, Ramah Taskforce have access to the Haytham Aero unit, which is a flyer, and it's very good. It is the best anti-flyer flyer in the game. It's excellent at hunting down enemy flyers and killing them before they can be a threat, and is just generally good quality. MSV, Mimetism 6, decent quality gun. I recommend the Red Fury. Flyers are very strong right now, and having a flyer that can go and kill enemy flyers before moving on to other duties, that's just good to have. That's a pretty decent list of strengths and some things that are mechanically compelling. But now let's talk about limitations and why I think Ramah are a challenge faction, because almost every one of those strengths that I mention does have something that compromises it somehow. Starting with the super soldier stuff. The expensive stuff in Ramah Taskforce is really expensive, particularly relative to what you get. Something happened in N5's rebalance where being hackable is actually pretty heavily discounted, right? In N5, if you're a hackable troop, that comes with a points discount. Reasonably, it should. But that means that having an army of unhackable aggressive pieces, those are all just a bit more expensive than perhaps you might expect. And especially when you combine that with them having these grab bag of skills, where many of them have close combat abilities and gunfighting abilities and some other rules, they are all universally probably more expensive than they're worth. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the best pieces in Ramah Taskforce, in terms of playing at the top end of the game, the more elite pieces, but which are cost effective, are Janissaries and Mukhtar. And those are playable in other factions, and they're probably more powerful there. The stuff that's unique to Ramah Taskforce, things like Namur and Nahab, are paying multi-role costs for multi-role rules, and they don't have anything that discounts them. And that means the curse of the multi-role unit is in really strong effect in this faction. Because if you're taking a model that is built to both gunfight and play in close combat, and its cost is being bloated by other rules, you will invariably have to use either their gunfighting or their close combat to pursue some kind of an objective and kill an enemy piece. And sooner or later, you'll be confronted by the reality that these are not particularly great gunfighters that you're using for gunfighting, or not particularly great close combatants that you're using for close combat. And yes, while you will try and always use the best of those tools for the job, you're just going to end up with a bunch of stuff that's ballistic skill 13 or ballistic skill 12 or CC 21 trying to make that stick. I would go as far as to say that you could knock 5 to 10 points off of a lot of the premier profiles in Ramah and not even bat an eyelid. The faction could just absorb that and not become imbalanced. You could give a Ramah player 20 extra points to play with in any given list, and it would probably just bring them up to about an A- faction, because the expensive stuff is just so expensive. And so, all right, well, let's talk about how we get around paying for that expensive stuff. The bottom end things we have in this faction are cheap. We have AVA3 Flash Pulse bots. Let's talk about the curse of AVA3 Flash Pulse bots, because I never want to put 3 for Noose remotes in a list. They are a 7-point order and a repeater and a flash pulse, and that's good value. But by the time we put the third one into a list, cool, we have just added 3 troops to a list that cannot progress the game state. They can't score scenario points, they can't kill enemy troops, they can barely hold territory. They are just there to provide regular orders and a little bit of defensive fluff to support the super soldiers. But you tend not even to stop with 3 flash pulse bots in many Ramah lists. I have had at least one experience heading up to this video where I took a list that had 3 flash pulse remotes and 2 Nafatun light flamethrowers, and those were kind of my order infrastructure that let me take a bunch of super soldiers. And I rolled into turn 3 with 6 regular and 1 tack-aware order. I had a Namur in a combat group, took a face-to-face roll, got crit, and died at the top of 3. And then I had 6 regular orders remaining that I could only spend on 3 Fanus remotes and 2 Nafatun. I just couldn't spend them. I just didn't spend those 6 regular orders. I basically passed turn to my opponent, because none of those cheap pieces that we use to try and afford the really expensive super soldiers actually kind of do anything. That's a serious problem. On top of that, once we have afforded the elite pieces, we can still end up with a faction that it's accidentally very possible to build a list for that just doesn't do terribly much damage. Quite often, your strongest gun in Ramah Taskforce will be an AP Spitfire or a generic HMG, and that's sort of the top end for how much damage you can do. If you're not using those, you're probably using Red Furies, and then once we get into close combat, there's a lot of viral CCWs. I don't dislike viral weaponry, even with the nerf it took in N5, but you can just run into a situation where a Nahab is staring at an enemy tag, knowing that they probably just can't kill it with the order pools that they have access to. And that produces a weird kind of order inefficiency, because a lot of the guns that we're going to be using here are ballistic skill 12 or 13, and might have relatively reduced lethality. We have a little bit of tactical awareness and NCO in Ramah Taskforce and some good mobility, but it can just take a bunch of orders to secure gunfights, which saps away the order efficiency of those pieces. And then finally, just in terms of other limitations, well known at this point is that Ramah Taskforce midfield is pretty limited. I'd say it's better in N5 than it was in prior editions, but we're still getting by off of very, very constrained elements in the midfield. There's not usually a lot that we can put between us and the enemy in our forward positions to slow them down, and so that forces Ramah Taskforce a little bit into kind of a hard castle playstyle. I do think Ramah Taskforce can play that kind of style, but we're pigeonholed into it a little bit, and being forced to use hard AROs to defend puts you in situations where your second combat group often has to be quite expendable because it will be sustaining damage on the way down. And while we can be very good at reconstituting pieces with both engineers and doctors, you have to begin your turn with less orders because your total reaction bots, for example, are suppressed and unconscious, and you have to spend orders to bring them back. That's the necessary price of survival, but it further impacts how we can order efficiently play Ramah Taskforce and how we build our lists. And all of these things collectively produce a faction that is, to my mind, a challenge faction. Now, it's not unsalvageable, and for the remainder of this video, we'll be talking about things about the faction I think are cool and interesting, and there is some cool stuff in there. There's some fun surprises. The grab bag of skills approach can be pretty interesting in terms of playing with these pieces. But the high end of performance in Ramah Taskforce is just able to win a game sometimes, and the low end is a tendency to either fold against enemy pressure or crap out in round 3, or both. Still, with that buyer beware, and with the hope that whenever the next update comes, sometime this year, Ramah Taskforce see plenty of developer attention, let's now look, as they currently stand, at some of the high points in Ramah Taskforce, and the stuff that is cool and interesting and which I recommend playing. We're going to start, as is often the case, by going through fire teams, and happily, one of the first fire teams we'll be talking about is the Ramah Taskforce fire team, and it's genuinely one of the strengths of the faction. Not only is it a hugely flexible fire team, able to be formed off a large number of troops with quite a lot of flexible keywords, but it can be taken as both a duo and a Haris and a core, which means that if we want to, we can run line infantry duos or duo troops with line infantry and get bonuses, and that's just a nice quality of life thing that we will make use of in Ramah Taskforce. And so we begin with the Ghulam infantry. Now, there are a wide variety of troops to choose from here. Ghulam have historically had a huge number of interesting profiles, but in Ramah Taskforce we do need to be quite judicious about taking these because troop slots are at a premium, since one of the strengths of Ramah is that it has the low end to usually expand out to 15 troopers. A couple of profiles that I'd like to highlight in particular. The most important one to my mind is the NCO Ghulam with the grenade launcher and the smoke grenade launcher. This is a piece that I like to put along with a Zayadin or even just some kind of utility secondary Ghulam profile in Combat Group 2. I will often build Ramah Taskforce lists, and by often I mean in the week before recording this video, feverishly experimenting in Army, that load a lot of our defensive toolkit into Combat Group 2, things like Shehab Total Reaction Bots and Monstruckers. And having done that, what I need to then do is find a way to productively use the orders that are in that combat group, but still be useful even if maybe there aren't too many orders because the total reaction bots are dead. And a Ghulam duo is actually really good at that. If I have an NCO Ghulam with the grenade launcher and smoke grenade launcher, and it's duoed with a Ghulam Doctor or a Ghulam Hacker or a Zayadin, it gets duo bonuses, it can lay down smoke effectively. Even if there are no other orders than is being generated by the duo, with the NCO order, we've got 3 to spend, which should be plenty to maneuver and lay down some smoke. And if there are spare orders, cool, we have Specfire. Absolute worst case scenario, we can just lob a couple of grenades. If it's the first turn and we're going first and there's nothing else to do, no problem, boss. Lay out some grenade fire, maybe we'll secure a kill. And that is very valuable to me, making sure that Combat Group 2 is always useful, because we cannot leave any money on the table in this faction. We have to get use out of that combat group. Some of the other profiles here that are quite useful, the Doctor is a very good Doctor, and the Hacker is pretty useful as well. We can upgrade, we can pay a few more points for Valyria Gromos and get most of the same content, but I do just want to call out 16 points is cheap for a Willpower 14 Hacker, and we're often taking like 3 Fanus remotes in this faction. That means we have a very robust deployment zone hacking network, and just having one hacker whose only job is to be able to declare Carbonite or Oblivion against incoming robots and Sujans and heavy infantry, etc., that's just really useful to have. Since we have already paid for the network, turning it on and making it live against intruding enemy heavy infantry is just valuable enough that you should, in my mind, kind of always have at least one hacker, just to deter those intrusions into your deployment zone by hackable targets. Now, there are also Lieutenant Ghulam profiles, there are also Lieutenant Nafatun profiles. Often you'll take one of those two, just whatever is easiest to hide and is most useful. In a vacuum, usually Nafatun would outweigh Ghulam. That's the 11-point Nafatun on the screen right now. And while they're functionally very, very similar troops, trading out the shotgun for a damage 6 light flamethrower just disincentivizes attacks against you a tiny little bit. Nafatun are most commonly taken as a lieutenant and a lieutenant decoy, and while I'm personally really hesitant about that, because if we're also taking 3 Fanus remotes, as I mentioned, cool, that is a third of our list that kind of just sits in the DZ, it is ultimately cheap and opens up super soldiers. Having a damage 6 flamethrower for corner zone guarding work or to disincentivize attacks is also fine. It's a good little defensive tool, and Nafatun count as Ghulams, as do Zayadin. And so if you're taking a Nafatun lieutenant and a decoy, cool, you've got a legal fire team duo there. You can easily slap something into it to give special dice bonuses, something that's a wild card, and just get some utility. Now, once we're taking Ghulam infantry for the utility, Nafatun for the lieutenants, we want something to add a little bit of teeth to it, and this is where Zayadin come into play. These guys were absolutely outstanding in N4. They were very good in N4, and frankly, they are still very good, but their role has contracted lightly, because they cost basically the same and do basically the same that they did in the prior edition, but a lot of other things elsewhere in the game have kind of gotten better around them. The water level has risen and they haven't, and the big thing that holds Zayden back relative to how they performed in N4 is that they used to be active turn troops and pretty serviceable ARO pieces if you needed, but relying on marksmanship for your ARO models now is something you want to just kind of be careful about. Having albedo in the enemy army can really threaten Zayden as ARO pieces, and if they don't have very high mods on their rolls, they are just Ballistic Skill 12, Armor 2, BTS 3, single wound, and importantly, not shock immune, so just be careful using them as ARO pieces. Despite that, I really like the heavy machine gun, and sometimes the AP sniper rifle if I need to save either points or SWC, as a gun in Combat Group 2. I already want to put in a Ghulam smoke grenade launcher in that combat group. Doing so kind of guarantees that the Zayden will have enough orders to at least accomplish a little bit. And once I relieve the Zayden of the obligation to be my primary and sole firepower piece, cool, 31 points, 5 dice on 15s with that heavy machine gun. It's got Warhorse, it's got marksmanship, it's got regeneration if it goes down, it's even got combat instinct in a pinch. Although that's never a skill I want to be using on it. Ultimately, it's a 5 dice on 15's HMG with shock, and that's a very serviceable gun to put in Combat Group 2. Now, in previous editions of the game, I might have taken 2 or even 3 of these and split them across my combat groups and had lots of redundancy in my firepower. I don't think that's how you play Ramah in N5, but if you've got one of these guys, I do think you should often still play it. Again, my preference is just duoed with a Ghulam in Combat Group 2, just being useful, making use of whatever orders I've got set there. Works very well in that circumstance, and if I absolutely need to, could take the role of an ARO piece of desperation, just exercising some care when doing so. Regeneration is a very nice rule to have, especially if you don't have any doctors, but it doesn't a defensive piece make for the Zayden. They are offensive and fire support to enable your other pieces to move forward. Now, technically a wildcard rather than a member of the Ramah Taskforce team, but worth mentioning while we're talking about all of the Ghulams, is Layla Sharif, who counts as a Ghulam. And while she's a bit more expensive than any of the other hackers you might add into a Ghulam line team, she does add a little bit that can make her worth considering, especially if you're going for, I'm only having one hacker in this entire list, and I want that hacker to turn on my deployment zone repeater network and cover a bunch of bases. I could very easily see, for example, Layla Sharif forming part of perhaps a Combat Group 2 Haris team where it joins a Smoke Grenade Ghulam and a Zayden. That's 3-person fire team bonuses at that point, and what Layla is doing is giving you a Combat Instinct killer hacker with Carbonite, and she has her own firewall, so she's relatively resistant to getting picture dived. And she's one more model where if you do have spare Combat Group 2 orders, especially if there's nothing in grenade range or you don't feel like making spec fire attacks, just laying a couple of EM mines can also be a productive outlet to Combat Group 2 orders. She's even potentially a gun of absolute desperation, although rolling 4 dice on 12s with a shock marksman rifle is not something I ever really want to do unless I have no other choice. Mostly she's a hacker with EM mines, but she covers a lot of grounds and she adds a killer hacker in what can be kind of a low impost way. So useful, taken occasionally, particularly useful being a Combat Instinct hacker, killer hacker with Carbonite, just very much a kind of does everything piece in the hacking space. I often take just one hacker in Ramah Taskforce, she's not a bad one to choose. Now, from the Ghulam, still staying in the Ramah Taskforce fire team, we then move to the Quarij. Because these can be used to form a Ramah Taskforce fire team, they can be a duo, a Haris, or a core, and they are definitely better than they have been previously. These have been the subject to a glow up. It's just kind of worth noting that they are still very, very expensive and single wound. But there is a very interesting collection of tools here. The obvious downside is Fighter 1, a single wound on troops that on average cost north of 30 points. There are many heavy infantry that are cheaper than Quarij. If you can manage that, what you get is a hybrid close combat and gunfighting piece where they have ballistic skill 12 with relatively high damage weapons, immunity armor, CC attack -6 and CC 23 and natural born warrior. That's actually good enough for Quarijers to go toe to toe with most things in CC. And with 6-2 move and super jump 3 inches, they move 9 inches on the jump. so they are enormously mobile if you can manage those parabolas. And while they are single wound, being Armor 2 BTS 3 with immunity armor means that unless they get crit, they have a very strong tendency to not actually go all the way to dead if they lose a face-to-face roll. And because there is a doctor for 30 points is expensive, but because there is a doctor that can be part of the Quaritch team, if you want to try and reconstitute your forces and continue to push the attack, actually they can do that quite well. The limitations here is that ballistic skill 13 with no significant modifiers. You should only be taking gunfights with Courage where it is one that you expect you're going to win, where you're punching down into something, where you've got something in good range, or perhaps where you are using that enormously expensive NCO MSV2 Mark 12 profile to actually get some mods in your favor. Otherwise, these guys should almost be conceived of as very mobile close combat troops that can coincidentally fight and accomplish objectives, because the CC -6 with CC23 genuinely sets them up to win close combat fights that they get into. Now, you can run Quaritch as a duo or a Haris as a core. In pretty much all of those cases, you'll be selecting some of these profiles, but you'll be accompanying them by Captain Islam himself. And there we get to Tariq Mansouri, Quaritch Amir, and this guy is unique to Ramah Taskforce and is genuinely one of the most interesting things about the faction. Now, he is enormously expensive, but there is a grab bag of skills here that we can absolutely use to our favor, and unlike the rest of the Quaritch, he can actually gunfight and impose a negative modifier, and he's still very, very good in melee, and he has 2 wounds. The total profile here is 6-4 move with that enhanced super jump. That's excellent, that's very fast. CC23, ballistic skill attack 13, but with BS attack -3. Armor 15, or willpower 15, armor 3 and BTS 3, so he's a little bit tougher just on his armor, and he has that 2nd wound. He's also got Warhorse, which the Quaritch otherwise lack. He's still a natural born warrior, and his weapons are armor piercing. He has an AP Spitfire. That's what we will often take. I have tried to make the tactical awareness profile kind of fit in lists, but no, I think if you're taking him, you pay for the gun, because we want armor piercing rounds at range in Ramah Taskforce can be weirdly hard to find. If you can access them, take them. I also really like that he has a DACW rather than a viral weapon, which means that if you need to go and punch down a tag, he can reasonably do that. Now, he's not cheap. The non-lieutenant Spitfire profile is 49 points, the lieutenant +1 order profile is 53 points, and we're probably going to be at least duoing him with a Quaritch Doctor, which means the total cost there comes all the way up to 83 points if we're taking the lieutenant. But for that cost, we get an enormously mobile, dangerous at range and in melee, fire team duo that is carting around a doctor to reconstitute Tariq if he goes down, and just a high willpower specialist in its own right. And if we want to, we could feasibly scale that all the way up to a 3 or a 4-person fire team to get ballistic skill bonuses, etc. You can genuinely invest heavily in Quaritch, provided the rest of your list plays around them. One of the lists we'll show off at the end of this video is making use of Tariq Mansouri in a large team, and one of them is showing him off in a duo. And in both cases, while I think he's very expensive, he is justifying those points we've invested in him. Now, there are a few other pieces that can join the Ramah Fire team as part of the Ramah Fire team, and we'll sort of bounce back and forward between wildcards, etc. But one that I do want to mention is the Beast Hunters Free Guild. Now, you can take the infield or forward deploying camouflage versions of these guys. They're Beast Hunters. We're very familiar with them right now. They form part of the limited amount of midfield that Ramah has. But I want to just call out that there is some utility in the Beast Hunter FTO in Ramah Taskforce, because we're often going to be taking fire teams that it can join. And one of the things I have mentioned that Ramah often wants to do is build a relatively robust hard ARO setup. And since we're taking fire teams we can join the Beast Hunter into, there are far worse things to use as an ARO piece in this game than a ballistic skill 11 +1 special die Panzerfaust with mimetism for 9 points. That is really cheap for a profile that could catastrophically blow out your opponent's game plan. And while I wouldn't take it in every list because Ramah can find itself running into a little bit of an irregular issue that it isn't well situated to manage, you don't want too many irregulars in Ramah Taskforce, I really don't mind, if you've got 9 points spare and are wondering what to spend it on, putting a Beast Hunter into a fire team and using it as an ARO piece. Because absolute worst case scenario, you can activate that fire team, you can go ahead, you can do some stuff, and then as one of the last orders of the game, You can have the Beast Hunter just spend its irregular order to lay an AP mine somewhere, and it will then rejoin the fire team in the states phase, none the worse for wear. Now, it will often be the worse for wear because you're using it as an arrow piece and it will die, but 9 points is not a bad price to pay for that. Consider Beast Hunters as things you can have join your Ramah Taskforce fire teams in Ramah Taskforce. Now, another common addition, technically a wildcard, but a common addition to Ramah Taskforce fire teams in Ramah Taskforce is Valiria Gromos. If we're not taking her in a Ramah team, we may often take her in a Janissary team. She's a wildcard, which is really useful, and she's just one of those hackers that's good to have as a one-of in a list. Consider her as an upgrade over a Gulam hacker, where you're paying 3 points for 3 points of BTS and a pitcher, and randomly, occasionally, you might benefit from the +1 burst to total control. It's the pitcher that is the interesting thing there. Linkable network projection in Ramah Taskforce, even on Ballistic Skill 11, is something that it's not necessarily had terribly much of previous, and that can be quite useful. I don't consider hacking, offensive or defensive, as more than a supplementary part of Ramah Taskforce game, particularly because we will see, if you want to play a killer hacker, we will see a killer hacker later on that does not need a pitcher to make its work valuable, and we've already covered, for example, Layla Sharif, who comes with a firewall herself. So our hackers often are comfortable, if we're doing killer hacking things, just kind of walking up to the enemy and killing them normally. But network projection is still valuable, and she's a willpower 14 specialist, and she's a wild card. So you might comfortably just splash her into any of the fire teams in this faction. And the other really standout wild card, able to both constitute part of a Ramah fire team and just also act as a wildcard into any other team, is the Namur Experimental Operative Group, only available in Ramah Taskforce. If you want to play with these things, that is a good reason to be considering Ramah. Now, for my money, I think they embody both the strengths and the weaknesses of the faction, because there is a bunch of interesting stuff here that is very cool. And also they are 40-something points for a Ballistic Skill 13 or CC21 model. That's really, really expensive. When you play a Namur, you will be confronted with the fact that you have a huge variety of options in terms of how you might approach the game, but none of them are necessarily truly deadly. But the skill set here is interesting. 6-2 move with Climbing Plus is nicely mobile. CC21 Burst 2 in close combat is good enough to beat non-CC experts. And Ballistic Skill 13 with Ballistic Skill Attack +1 Burst is good enough to be a threat at range as well. Armor 2 BTS 6 with Immunity Enhanced is surprisingly durable. You don't want to fight just random enemy guns that can inflict lots of hits on you, but a Namur is very good, for example, at punching all the way up into really elite things. And that's actually really valuable in a faction like Ramah Taskforce, because a lot of what we'll find ourselves doing in Ramah is fairly serviceable at punching down. If we have something like a Haytham Aero unit, for example, it is fantastic at strafing the enemy deployment zone, killing line troops, exposed targets, etc. It doesn't want to fight a tag. It doesn't want to fight Achilles. A Namur Experimental Operative Group can fight both of those things. She's actually perfectly suited to doing so. And the reason why is that she combines that immunity enhanced, right? She will almost always survive an attack, at least one attack against her. Plasma from Achilles might be an issue. She can die to a crit, but she can close with something with relative confidence that even an explosive range coming down range from a tag isn't going to kill her. And that lets her make maximum use of her Emarat and EMCCW. Anything in the game that is expensive and vulnerable to EM weapons has to be really scared of a burst 2 EM template coming their way. And that lets the Namur fork some very aggressive attacks, for example, moving into close combat and threatening to attack them in close combat with an EMCCW if they dodge, or EM template them if they don't. And because she has immunity enhanced, she can reliably survive things like flamethrowers from tags, for example, and even has a reasonable chance of surviving a CC attack back from something like Achilles. I don't want to, but she has a reasonable chance because of immunity enhanced and 2 wounds. And that makes her one of the best big game hunters in the game, where she has the kit to really punch up into hard targets that other pieces in this faction might struggle with. Now, she's also quite good at punching down into light elements. She is still a Burst 5 Spitfire or a Burst 4 Breaker Rifle. Plumbing Plus lets her get into positions to make use of that, and she's a specialist, which is fantastic, willpower 14. It's just she doesn't want to be fighting anything in that kind of middleweight, anything that is cheap enough to wear the template, but has visibility modifiers to potentially risk the gunfight. The last thing a Namur wants to fight is some random Mimetism 3 or Mimetism 6 gunfight skirmisher with 1 wound in the midfield, which she can't hit and doesn't reasonably threaten. But we've got plenty of other things in the faction to deal with that, so a Namur should be considered as a piece for really going after hard targets that nobody else can solve. Now, that's our Ramah fire team spoken for, so our next fire team is a Mukhtar fire team. These guys can form a duo or a Haris, and it's just a very solid team. Expensive, but very solid. These guys are probably one of the only regiments in the faction that I don't consider overcosted and I don't think need a buff. And the only real downside, for lack of a better term, with them is that if you want to run them, they're probably better supported in vanilla Hack Islam. Still, these guys are durable. They gunfight as well as or better than anything else in the faction. If you take a Mukhtar MSV2 with Red Fury and you're shooting through smoke, the only issue you have is that you might struggle to kill things with the Red Fury, and then you can duo with either the Doctor or the Hacker, or you can Haris with both and be able to accomplish the bulk of classifieds in the game. They're very solid, they're self-contained. At this point, I feel anyone who is a veteran of the game will be very familiar with them, but if you are new to Infinity and you're interested in using these guys, the only really important thing is that you have smoke available to the MSV2 Red Fury, because provided you can give that thing some smoke, it will win gunfights against basically everything else, stacking the smoke penalty and mimetism and having plenty of burst and ballistic skill 13 and an MSV2. And provided you have enough orders, most things in the game are vulnerable to sheer weight of fire from a Red Fury if you really need it. I like Mukhtar a lot, we'll see them in one of the lists at the end of this video, and provided you protect them, you really can't go wrong fielding them. Now, similar to the Mukhtar, the other quite effective fire team piece that we have as a Haris or core, but which can be fielded in other factions, are Janissaries. In this case, the Janissary can be taken in both Hack Islam and Kwapu Kalki in addition to Ramah Taskforce, and it is arguably stronger in all of those, but hey, not the end of the world, it is still good in Ramah. Janissaries are just good, durable gunfighting troops. They have high ballistic skill attack -3, good armor, good BTS, and 2 wounds. They're not overpaying for anything, and the heavy machine gun is a very good active turn gun. The missile launcher is a very good reactive turn gun. And I've even got a little bit of time for things like the lieutenant or non-lieutenant tinbot profiles, because sometimes giving a tinbot to hide Valyria Gromors behind can be a useful addition to the faction. They've also got the very interesting Doctor 2 Wounds profile, which is to say that you can recover 2 wounds from a target when you bring it back from unconscious. Important to note, Janissaries do not have cubes, so if you're thinking about combining a Janissary HMG or missile with the Doctor 2 Wounds profile, just be aware that you're rolling the dice once there and really hoping you succeed. Not necessarily better than a high willpower Doctor, or even just using an auto medkit via Speedball. Weigh your risks on that one. But Janissaries, very, very solid in Ramah Taskforce, as they are in Hack Islam and QK. Now, unlike Hack Islam and QK, in Ramah we have access to a second type of Janissary, which are the Hortlak Janissaries. These guys trade out some armor and some wounds, they have no wound incapacitation instead, and some ballistic skill, for a grab bag of skills, the most interesting things of which are Mimetism and an MSV1, which is very nice to have. Now, they don't quite have the weapons to fully capitalize on it. I could see myself taking both the K1 Marksman and the AP Sniper Rifle some of the time, and compared to a lot of the other things in this faction, 31 points for those 2 pieces doesn't feel unreasonable. We've also got 29-point Chain of Command, which we might take if we're playing Tariq, and one of only 2 sources of Eclipse in the faction, with the Deactivator and Disco Ball on the AP Submachine Gun emitter profile. If you're interested, the other Disco Ball profile sits on Quarij and is quite useful there. Now, the only thing in my mind that holds the Hortlak back is that the only way to give it link bonuses is that it must be linked with a Janissary. You need to have an actual Janissary to form the basis of a Janissary fire team, and so it's not possible, for example, to have Hortlak wildcard into a Ghulam or Nafatun team. They would be really, really useful there, competing in really interesting ways with pieces like the Zayadin, but since they can only go in a Janissary team and you have to take them with a Janissary, basically all of these profiles you have to wonder what it is that they're doing when they're stapled to a Janissary HMG. I'm probably not taking the AP Sniper Rifle Hortlak, because if I'm taking a Janissary, and I want an ARO piece, I'll probably spend those points on the Janissary missile. So they kind of get obsoleted a little bit by their fire team composition, even though, on their merits, the profiles are solid and interesting, and there may be some way to make use of them. Now, just a couple of other wildcard teams to kind of mention. The Burkut Aerospace Engineering Regiment counts as a Janissary, it can wildcard into any team. I have tried to make use of these guys in the past in other factions and not quite succeeded, with Ballistic Skill 12 in particular being the thing that I find lets me down with regards to the Burkut. But at their cheapest, they're 26 points. And while they're slow as hell at 4-4, they can theoretically wildcard into any team, and if you're looking to build a Janissary team, Burkut do count as Janissaries. You could theoretically build a fairly durable and powerful pure core Janissary team by combining Janissaries and Hortlak and Burkut, which would be relatively appealing if not for the fact that there was no tactical awareness and no NCO anywhere in there, and their 4-4 move, which means the team just isn't getting across the table in anything like a good time. And so there's just not a terribly strong argument for that in favor of splitting those pieces up and running them a bit more independently, just benefiting from the duo bonus +1 special die. Burkut, not particularly bad. I have struggled to make them work, but there's enough in the profile to at least play with. Finally, a very quick note about Yara Haddad. Arguably a somewhat scuffed profile, but we do have reasonable access to smoke in Ramah Taskforce via the Ghulam and Carmen Johns. And because she is arm immune, which means she is shock immune, Yara will usually, if she loses a face-to-face roll, not go all the way to dead. And we have lots of doctors, and she's not too expensive. You can wildcard her into any team, and if you need a discount firepower piece, her, a Ghulam NCO, and a Ghulam Doctor is a team that works. It can move forward, it can get her into range, it can lay down smoke for her, it can let her take a gunfight, and then you are just hoping that your damage 7 AP marksman rifle inflicts casualties in time for you to pull back. But given that fire team collectively costs not much more than one of your super soldiers in some case, it can be well worth pursuing if you're looking for some play on a budget. Now, before we jump out of fire teams and into like cool and interesting independent operators, I want to just pause and make a quick note about kind of an unsung hero, the Monstrucker, specifically the 12-point submachine gun chain rifle drop bear Monstrucker. Ramah Taskforce is a faction where we need to defend ourselves against enemy first turn attacks, and we are often using total reaction bots to do that. A Monstrucker is a cheap, irregular engineer that we can combine with 1 or 2 Shehab total reaction bots and just buy ourselves that time. She's not glitzy, she will suck down our command tokens rerolling that willpower 13, but she is cheap and efficient, and if there's nothing else for her to do, she can use that irregular order to throw a drop bear. You probably want one alongside a TR bot in quite a few Ramah lists, so hey, let's just mention her here. Thumbs up to the Monstrucker, put her in lists. Combat group 2 of 1 or 2 Shehabs, plus a Monstrucker, plus a utility fire team Haris or Duo, like I've mentioned with the Ghulams. That's kind of my go-to for Ramah lists, and it's very worthwhile. The Nahab Aero Mobile team is one of the other signature super soldiers that are available in Ramah Taskforce, and only in Ramah Taskforce, and it's kind of interesting. Ultimately a collection of very expensive profiles, mostly because we are always paying for infiltration or parachutist, but there are some interesting elements to work with here. Decoy 2 doesn't really do anything at all with parachutist, it's functionally a non-functional skill there. That was a sentence. But you might use it to try and let a non-camouflaged infiltration Nahab survive for a time in the midfield. For my money, I would generally still prefer to take a parachutist, which means that if I reach for Nahab, it is only on scenarios where parachutist is useful. But with the addition of radial scenarios to the game, most recently in ITS Season 17, but also with provisioning before that, parachutist is really good in radial scenarios. And locally, we've been experimenting with applying radial deployment to other traditionally non-radial scenarios. There is a tournament coming up soon, for example, that has unmasking on a radial deployment alignment, and it works really well and is really interesting. Parachutist slaps in those scenarios because you have so much table space to play with that you can bring the model zone on, and a Nahab is pretty good in those situations. And a little bit like the Namur, what you're getting is kind of a multi-role piece, where you have CC23, Berserk, Martial Arts 3 and a viral CCW, and Stealth importantly, for very good close combat provided you're attacking non-structure models. Or Ballistic Skill Attack -3, admittedly only BS12, but a collection of either Red Fury or Submachine Gun or Boarding Shotgun Emitter Zapper profiles, which can also do some damage, particularly if you use parachutist to come in an enemy blind spot and get some shots for free. And either of those two things can potentially do a lot of damage. The dream is that you just stealth into close combat and start shanking things, which can take a lot of orders. But with the cheapest Namur parachutist clocking in at 31 points, and even the Killer Hacker coming in at 35, and it's a serviceable Killer Hacker, Willpower 14, BTS 3, you've got plenty of the kind of profile that can win you a game baked into these pieces. Now, the issue is, of course, that they are very expensive. Especially if you want a Red Fury, we are not paying peanuts for these. They cost a lot. And so usually I would be leaning toward one of the specialist profiles, and angling in particular for a stealth kill in CC if I can get it, but I'll take a back shot with ballistic skill attack -3 if I can't. Zappers and boarding shotguns or submachine guns cover a lot of ground, and zappers in particular mean that anything that we can't quickly kill with the viral CCW, we at least significantly threaten with the zapper. The specialist operative can even zapper things and then just slap a decharge onto them for a clean kill if they have structure. And the Killer Hacker can potentially fire emitter shots into the back of things from downtown. So lots of potential upsides for these pieces if you can find the 31 to 35 points to take them. Another parachutist that is unique to Ramah Taskforce and is very interesting are the Hakim Special Medical Assistance Team. I have never put these in a list, and I probably should more than I do, because they are a very solid doctor with a plus burst medikit and parachutist and a +1 burst boarding shotgun. I like all of these things. They even have regeneration, which is kind of hilarious and will occasionally matter, but those points do ultimately add up to 24, 25, 29 points for the most interesting profile. That's non-negligible. These are still just single wound pieces, and even with medikit and doctor of this quality, you can have plenty of cases where, no, actually you just don't need a doctor right now. And paying as much as 29 points for a piece that is primarily its skills are baked into making it an awesome recovery element, and just using it as a burst 3 shotgun parachutist is not the end of the world, but if you're doing that, hey, maybe we could spend a couple more points and take a Nahab instead, which is much more dangerous and more durable. So a little bit of weirdness with the role here. When do you really need a parachutist doctor? It's difficult to make an army whose playstyle works with the Hakims, but any of the shotgun profiles and the 24-point emitter profile in a scenario that is particularly beneficial to have parachutists in, you could give them some consideration. Now, a troop that does not need special consideration to be played is the Haytham Aero Unit. I've discussed it already in this episode. I've discussed it previously in other videos. It is a flyer. Flying vehicles are very good. The Haytham is one of the best, and it is the best anti-flyer flyer. You should probably take one of these in most Ramah Taskforce lists. The Red Fury Panzerfaust is my preferred profile. It fights well at a lot of range bands, and one particular thing about it that is kind of worth noting in Ramah is that there are factions, including Hak-Islam, where you can take a Haytham or a vehicle where they fight a little bit for deployment zone space. There is very little deployment zone congestion in Ramah Taskforce. We will have maybe 1 or 2 other Silhouette 4s in this list, but we will very rarely be struggling to find a place to hide a vehicle. If there's one place in our deployment zone that the Haytham can go, no problem. That's where it goes. It can be given priority, and so it's low impost because so many of our other pieces are Silhouette 2 models with mobility skills. Easy to include, easy to play, very good quality, and genuinely one of the true stars of the faction. Let's just kind of overlook the fact that it can also be played with Saladin in vanilla Hak-Islam. Now, a slightly more niche piece, but also very interesting, is the Murabid Tuareg. There are a few profiles here that are like, oh, hey, that's interesting. The Doctor 2 wound profile with infiltration in particular was called out in some of the notes that I got from players as part of seeking input into this video. But for my money, the profile that is really interesting here is the Killer Hacker. Now, I wouldn't take it all the time. 28 points is expensive, but a Willpower 15 hidden deployment firewall Killer Hacker with infiltration is a really interesting missile. So long as you don't run after a true Apex Killer Hacker, like don't try and stage drive Deferson behind a Tinbot, the Tuareg can do a really good job going after and scalping out enemy killer hackers and other hackers, and then just returning to camouflage. She's a very good hacking predator in that respect. The thing is that you don't need that a huge amount in Ramah Taskforce, because as noted, a lot of our faction doesn't have the problem of being hackable. Most of our super soldiers, all of our super soldiers, aren't hackable. But with the introduction of the Haytham Aero unit, okay, all of a sudden we do have a profile that we care about getting hacked. We care about getting hacked a lot. And so any list that includes a Haytham can give some consideration to a Tuareg killer hacker as preemptive insurance against the kind of things that might slow down or stop a Haytham from accomplishing its maximum objectives. Another excellent independent operator piece are Carmen and Batard. And actually, I'm just going to say, probably just auto-take these. They are the only warband in the faction. They are dangerous in close combat. They are one of only 2 sources of smoke. And they're just a consistently dangerous missile. Batard is also a sensor. Between the 2 of them, you should almost always be able to kill at least one thing in close combat because you have the ability to move both of them into CC and then effectively make it a non-face-to-face roll by having whoever doesn't get attacked score the kill. And if it's a 17, like yes, that'll often result in Carmen, for example, dying, but if that's the case, that's not the end of the world because Carmen is 17 points, and if you use that to kill a key enemy piece, that's totally fine. You even get some random and very interesting spec fire opportunities these days because Batard picked up PS6 grenades as part of the N5 update, which means that if you get these 2 up close, you can have them declare spec fire. Batard throws the grenade, Carmen Johns throws a smoke grenade, I guess, and maybe that also sets up a CC kill. I just like them a lot. They're high value, they've always got, peripherals are always something that I'm interested in including, and the damage that you can do, just having these things come around a corner and make an attack where Batard throws a grenade, and then Carmen forks either her chain rifle or her AP heavy pistols, just a ton of value here. Very, very solid, very dangerous warband troop, very worth including in basically every Ramah Taskforce list. Now, I'll also very quickly note that we have 2 serviceable tactical armored gears in Ramah Taskforce, the Shakush and the Magariba. Both can actually be duoed, either with themselves or with whoever you might like to join that fire team. You can have a Rafik remote in that fire team. You can also have wildcards like the Namur join, which can be kind of interesting. I have a lot of time for fire teams that are just 2 dudes with tactical awareness. And a Shakush plus Namur duo as a fire team of convenience that gets both of those troops moving around and doing things is something that kind of scratches that itch for me. The only issue is it's very, very expensive. That's like 100 points. And finding a list that supports that capability can be a little bit easier said than done. But some lists call for a tag, and while they are not deluxe or particularly special, the Shakush is fine and the Magariba is solid. Generally, if I'm playing a tag, I want to do so in a faction that has a lot more middleweight kind of pieces that can play around the space the tag creates. I want a faction with like interesting and exciting 20 to 30 point pieces. That's not Ramah Taskforce, so fitting tags in can be a little bit difficult, but I have played tags in Ramah and they performed serviceably. Alright, that's more than enough about profiles. Let's smash through some lists. Now we'll move quickly here because we will actually be looking at 3 different lists here, 2 of which I have written to showcase different concepts, and 1 of which has actually been tournament tested and was provided by one of the people who put input into this video, the Grix. The first of these is a kind of generic and well-rounded Ramah Taskforce list. There are things that have been cut that you could have included, but still generally showing off a bunch of the capabilities of the faction, and we begin with a Janissary fire team. Now, I would note, in this particular list, we have a number of options around lieutenant choices. I have gone with a Janissary lieutenant and a Nafutun serving as a decoy, but if you're not comfortable with that, and eminently reasonable, you can have a Nafutun lieutenant, and there is 1 point spare, so you can replace this Magariba pilot with a Nafutun lieutenant decoy, a regular Nafutun, and you can cover your bases that way. Consider that as an option. I was willing to downgrade the Nafutun to a pilot, partly because I was hoping that the Nafutun might sucker people into thinking I had an obvious LT, and secondly, I wanted a second Gizmo kit and a Medikit in this list for a few reasons. The list begins with a Janissary HMG, a Janissary AP Rifle Tinbot and Valeria Gromos as a fire team. This gives us Burst 5 HMG firepower, the rifle and light shotgun at closer ranges, and then Gromos benefiting from both the Tinbot and +1 special die for the pitcher, generally useful combat fire team, 2 Fanus remotes. To note, this is one of the only lists we will see that has just 2 Fanus. That is the number I would usually prefer to take. Once you get to 3 Fanus, you have a lot of non-lethal pieces in your list, but much of the time you have to. In this list, we could afford to run just the 2. We have a Haytham Aero unit, it's excellent, we've covered that in detail, Carmen and Johns, a Nafatun Magariba, and then a Murabrid Tuareg killer hacker. I consider her pretty valuable in this list because firstly, we do have network projection if we need it, although the Tuareg can really just close in for the kill herself if she wants. But secondly, we have more than the usual number of hackable pieces in this list. The Janissaries and the Haytham mean that we're a little concerned by enemy hackers, and having a powerful scalpel against them is worth including. In Combat Group 2, we have what has become for me kind of the Combat Group 2 in Ramah. One or two, in this case two, Shehab total reaction bots, a Monstrucker with a Nazmat, and then a Zayadin and Ghulam duo. This Zayadin Ghulam duo, as I kind of mentioned, its job is to spend spare orders in this combat group. The combat group's job at large is for these Shehabs to die as slowly as possible against enemy attacks and then be recovered by the Monstrucker, so the first combat group has space to do all of its work. And ultimately, this is a fine list. I have no concerns about playing this. Okay, I have some concerns. It has some issues around, for example, damage, like the damage output of the list. We have a single AP weapon at range beyond pistol. Our order count is not intensely high. We have one NCO and then that's it. But there is nothing that is really missing from this list, and I would theoretically be quite comfortable playing it in almost any scenario. It has potentially significant offense. It's got Ballistic Skill Attack -3 on a burst 4+1 HMG against enemy MSV AROs, and then it's got Smoke to close with everything else. It's got defense in the form of the Shehab total reaction bots, although it is kind of reliant on them to survive. And then it has probably just enough hacking to be reasonably useful in a hacking game that is well defended against enemy attacks. Overall, just a solid list, and one of my recommendations for starting points with Ramah Taskforce if the faction interests you. Our second homebrewed Ramah Taskforce list is one that is built to scratch the itch to play Quarij. Now, technically, the channel supporter Karatse, who made the request for this video, didn't ask for a Quarij list, but he did ask for Tariq and Quarij to be mentioned, and so here is a list that looks fun to play. I don't know if it will win every game, but it does look very fun because it's running a full Quarij fire team. We have Tariq Mansouri as Lieutenant, the NCO MSV2, Chain of Command, and a Doctor and a Beast Hunter. This Beast Hunter will join this team, even though, frankly, it's going to be put up as an ARO piece much of the time, and therefore probably die in pretty short order. Hey, he's doing his duty, and if he does get dragged along with the team, well, he's still got super jump, so he can move along with them. These guys move very, very fast. They move 9 inches on the jump. They have disco and close combat and lots that they can do, and as long as you just keep all of the single wound pieces alive, it looks fun to play. It's even got potentially 12 orders to spend, although we do have a little bit of an issue with irregulars in this combat group. But we have the +1 order from Tariq and the NCO from the Quarij. And if you really want to use the awesome Red Turban Troopers, and you want to use them maximally rather than just a duo, this is one of the ways to do it. This combat group is rounded out by a Sasha, Carmen and Batard, 2 for Noose, and a Camille. This is quite a lot at the bottom end that isn't really doing anything. Even the Sasha is a bit of a worrying irregular, but the Camille is pretty useful. We have multiple things we'd like to reload in this list. The disco balls in particular being something I want to make sure that I always have access to, given how dangerous these troops can be in close combat. And then Carmen and Batard, of course, are always useful. Sasha is a specialist who can go somewhere that these troopers aren't. The Quarij are very mobile, but it's nice to have another specialist somewhere else on the board. Combat Group 2 is a further extension of that same theme we showed off before. One Shehab in this case, a Monstrucker, a Zayadin, a Ghulam, and a Ghulam Hacker. So in this case, we're running this support fire team as a Haris, but we're getting the Ghulam Hacker into the list just so that these 2 for Noose and Camille are live as repeaters. That is purely defensive hacking. That Ghulam stays as far away from danger as it can, and in some cases it actually will just be left behind. We only need the Zayadin and the Ghulam to get Fireteam Duo bonuses, and the important thing is that this Ghulam is just never exposed to enemy killer hacking, and if I have to shuffle it all the way to the back of the deployment zone to avoid enemy pitches, I will comfortably do so. So yeah, this is a list built around maximum bouncy castle boys. It is much more of a fun list than a competitively optimized list, but I would also absolutely believe that it can win games, and in fact was inspired by a list that an Australian player took to CanCon not this year but the year before. Now, the year before, super jump rules were different and Quarij could move like 16 inches in one order. That isn't the case anymore, but the core thesis of the list definitely still functions. And then finally, we have a list that actually has been tournament tested and took 5th place at the Tidewater Satellite. This is a list that was submitted alongside a bunch of notes by the Grix. And while some of how this works has been laid out in a different way, we can see a lot of the same principles at work, and we have a Mukhtar Haris here. MSV2 Red Fury, Hacker, Hacking Device, and a Doctor. This lets us accomplish almost all of the classifieds in the game. That's really useful. We have a single Nafatun Lieutenant. This is a little bit obvious as far as LTs go. This is a risk, but it's a risk the list is choosing to bear. The Nafatun is in a Haris or Duo with a Gulam NCO for Smoke and the Gulam Hacker with Hacking Device. This NCO, I assume, is probably pretty dedicated to providing support to either Tariq or the Mukhtar MSV2, the MSV2 in particular really wanting access to Smoke to do smoke shooting. We've got a Monstrucker to support pieces in Group 2, and then a Tariq Mansouri and Quarij Doctor duo. This is the lightweight version of that duo, and it's very efficient. It's modestly efficient. Okay, it's almost 80 points, but for those 80 points, you get very fast, very jumpy, quite dangerous multi-role pieces. Tariq is only Ballistic Skill 13, but with Ballistic Skill Attack -3, once he is rolling 5 dice with that AP Spitfire, he's a genuine threat. The Doctor behind him will often get work done. Because Tariq has immunity armor, he's very unlikely to go all the way to dead, he's very likely therefore be recoverable, and he's very dangerous in close combat. So is the Quarij Doctor, and while it can't itself lay out smoke, provided you have smoke support from the Gulam, this is a fire team that does everything else quite effectively. It's got a good quality specialist, it can reconstitute itself, it can gunfight, and it can fight in close combat. What differs from how I have built lists in this list is what we're seeing in Combat Group 2, which is trying to maximize the offensive potential of the second combat group. So in this list, we have the Monstrucker in Group 1, and what we're doing in Group 2 is, this is where we have our Shihab and a War Correspondent, and 3 Fanus and a Haytham. What this is doing is saying, I am going to get my work out of the Haytham independent of the first combat group, and therefore maximize the chance of having 15 orders to spend offensively. If we look at these lists that I've shown that I have written, I can theoretically do the same, but I'm doing so with things like the Zayadin or with Gulam Smoke supporting an advance, stuff like that. In this case, 6 orders is usually going to be enough for a Haytham to do some fairly serious work. And I would say much of the time, if I was playing against this list, I would strip orders from Group 2 to limit the Haytham to just 4, but even with 4 it can potentially do some work doing things like suppressing ARO pieces. Because a Haytham can lunge 11 inches out of the deployment zone, it can always be in range of the enemy DZ on the first order if there are disposable pieces on ARO duty that it can go and fight, so it's still worthwhile even with 4 orders, and that would leave 10 orders, once we account for the NCO, in the first combat group to go and do some work. This is maximizing the Haytham alongside a combined assault. It's more offensively postured, but it still has the Shihab and the Monstrucker to handle that defensive obligation. And as was noted, the Grix came 5th at a satellite event with this, which indicates basically that he went something like 4-1 or 5-1. That's a really solid result, and definite credit to him. And so thanks to the Grix for both submitting this list and his extensive notes. And as a reminder, also big thanks to Tasu for sending through a huge amount of content that helped inform this video as well. Now, with that, we'll wrap up. Quick channel plug, if you'd like to support the channel, go ahead, click like, click subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so either via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube, or by using the Corvus Belly affiliate link in the video description. I don't know if it works, but you may as well give it a shot. We cover Infinity, Conquest, and other war games. We put out a video at least once a week, including faction-focused videos, tactics videos, and battle reports. We've been on a spate of faction-focused videos recently. They are quite a bit of effort to produce, probably do some battle reports soon. But regardless of what we cover, I hope you'll join me again next week for more Infinity content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.